With me, Devendra Subedi. In this program, we're going to talk about labor. Nepal's large number of Nepalese go abroad in search of greener pastures to earn money, and 25%, up to 25% of our income, national income, comes from remittance. That's the backdrop. Yes, we are talking about International Labour Organization's 50 years of engagement in Nepal, and we're privileged to have with us today the Director General of International Labour Organization, Mr. Ryder. Your Excellency, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
So you're here to mark the 50 years of ILO's engagement in Nepal. How do you find these 50 years in Nepal?
It's been a great story, as you say. Nepal joined our organization in 1966, right at the beginning. And for the last 50 years, I think we've shared a very interesting history together. I think we can say that we've recorded some important achievements, but we must be realistic. Nepal still has many challenges to resolve in the field of labour and social policy. So we've looked back this week. We had an event yesterday attended by the Prime Minister. We looked back at what we've done together, but, and I think that's much more important, we began to think about what we're going to do next. That's what
more than what we did in the 50 years, what we do next.
That's most important.
So one of the agendas that ILO champions are standards, labour standards, and of course decent work. And you have been a champion of that.
Indeed.
Could you explain these two terms, labour standards and decent work, to our viewers?
Yeah, let me start with decent work, because that's what the ILO stands for. If I say it in a nutshell, we want everybody to have a chance to have a decent job, to do decent work. So what is decent work? Well, it means a job that gives you a decent income, something which allows you to live at a reasonable level, look after the family, be okay. We also say that decent work means that you have to have social protection. If you get sick, if you're unemployed, you need to be helped over those difficult moments. We think also that decent work means your rights need to be respected at work. And what do we mean by rights? We have a package of fundamental rights at work. It means you have to have freedom to organise, if you want to organise in a trade union.
Yeah.
You have the right to bargain.
Yeah.
You have to be free from discrimination. You have to be free from forced labour. And of course, we're against child labour as well. And packaging all of this together is the idea of dialogue, and it's very important. We believe that when something goes wrong at work, and there are disagreements, there are conflicts, then you should resolve them by sitting down and talking. Social dialogue between employers, workers and governments. And our organisation, it's very special, it's part of the United Nations, but we're made up not just of representatives of governments, but also of workers and employers' representatives. So that's decent work.
So does it mean that ILO tries to build up the tripartite sort of framework in which the social dialogue can be forward?
Precisely, you've got it in a nutshell. I mean, the philosophy is, although people sometimes tend to see it otherwise, we believe that, you know, an employer and a worker are not a zero-sum game. If you sit down, you cooperate, workers get benefit from that, but also employers. All of the evidence shows that where employers have a good relation with their workers, decent standards of work, that company is more productive and more successful. Sustainable enterprises take care of their workers. Which brings me on to your other question, which was about international labour standards.
Yes.
One of the major things the ILO does, and we're nearly 100 years old, is to adopt what we call international labour conventions. These are treaties negotiated each year in Geneva and ratified by governments, and then they have the force of law. And up until now, the ILO has produced, over its long history, nearly 190 conventions. And they have to be ratified by governments to become effective. Nepal has ratified a relatively small number, 11. We'd like to see a few more. But very importantly, out of these 8 fundamental rights conventions, which define human rights at work, Nepal has ratified 7 out of the 8. The one missing is on freedom of association. It's our famous Convention 87. And in my talks in Kathmandu these last 2 days, I hope that we've opened the way for Nepal also to ratify that one. That would be great. That would be great.
That brings us to trade unionism. Often in a budding democracy like Nepal, trade unionism public opinion regarding trade unionism is like a tool to bargain, and especially when trade unions are shaped by the political ideologies, how difficult it is for the employer to accept that as a tool for social dialogue.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I think there's one basic point that we have to establish. It is that trade unions across the world, many of them have a political alliance or a political complexion. But the job of trade unions is not to do the job of a political party. They must not be subordinate to a political party. They can have their affinities, they can have their alliances, but the job of trade unions is to represent working people and do what working people, their members, want them to do, not what a political party wants them to do. And I've seen the development of trade unionism in Nepal over about 20 years. I've worked with the trade unions of Nepal, and I must say I'm very encouraged because
that has been a boom period for the trade unions.
They've been very important, I think, in the democratic development of Nepal and should be congratulated for that. But what I've seen as well is they are coming together across different political complexions. I attended the JTUCC, the Joint Trade Union Coordinating Council, yesterday, and there they were together, the different 10 organizations, joining together regardless of political complexion.
If I tell you, Nepal's trade unions still are very proud to tell themselves the sister organizations of a political party.
Well, you know, I'm British. I come from a country where the trade unions founded political parties. There is, that's okay.
That's okay.
As long, I think, as trade unions don't simply become the instrument of a political party. And there is a big difference between the two things. So I think Nepal's trade unions are doing a pretty good job of working together across political lines and representing working people.
How much are they doing to pressurize the policymakers to secure themselves, the workers, let's say social security? How much do you find them putting the pressure on the policymakers?
I've been told about something quite interesting since I've been in Kathmandu, which is not just trade unions, but also the Employers Federation have come together over the last 2 years, this famous process of dialogue which we talked about, and they have developed a common position, and this is very important, around a new Labour Act and a new Social Security Act. And those two things balance each other out, because the Labour Act admits a certain degree of flexibility that employers want in the labour market so they can operate more profitably. And the Social Security Act gives workers greater security to make the changes in the labour market. This is a package. It's before the Parliament. I think both sides, employers and workers, would like to see Parliament adopt it, and we're eagerly waiting to see if that's going to happen or not.
Coming back to the issue of foreign employment, Nepal is heavily dependent, Nepal's economy is heavily dependent on foreign employment. More than 25%, around 25% of our national income comes from remittance, and most of them are in informal labor market. How difficult it is for ILO, organizations like ILO, to address the issues in the informal labor market?
The informal labour market is a big problem, and by the way, looking just at Nepal before we go to migration, 90% or so of work is undertaken informally. And you're right, this is an enormous problem, because people working in informality generally don't have very good labour conditions. They're not protected by labour law because it's not applied properly. They don't have social security. It's a tough situation. So it's not good for workers. I don't think it's good for government either, because you can't collect taxes, you can't collect social security contributions from informal workers. And I would also say it's not good for employers, because if you're running a formal enterprise, obeying the rules, paying the minimum wage, paying social security, informal employment represents unfair competition. It can put you in a tight spot. But if I may come to the question of migration, you're absolutely right to point out to the heavy dependency of the Nepalese economy on migration. And you know, that brings to my mind two really important imperatives for Nepal. One is to create enough jobs here in Nepal, and they are sadly lacking, so that people are not obliged to migrate. Now, migration can be a very positive thing, but our position is that migration should be a genuine choice of a worker. They want to try it, and not a compulsion. And you know, I had a very, very interesting experience this afternoon when I visited a labour migration centre where workers were getting their work permits sorted out to go to different countries. And I spoke to a young man who was bound for Qatar. And I said, well, do you know what to expect? He said, well, I have friends there. They told me. And I said, well, what did they tell you? He said, stay at home. It's not great here. But he said, I'm compelled to go because I have no alternatives. So, in a sense, when migration is a compulsion and obligation because there's no alternative, we have a problem. And the second point, if I may, I'm sorry, the second point is when people do migrate, we have to make sure they do it in conditions which are fair, safe and orderly. They shouldn't be cheated, they shouldn't be subjected to abuse. And that's where I think the big challenge that we have is to manage migration fairly.
You spoke about generating employment in the country to stop that labour plight outside. How do you see possible in Nepal?
It is possible, but I really think that Nepal has to get down to this this issue. I'm aware that a national employment policy was adopted, I think, in 2014. But I think it's really time for Nepal to work out where its growth and jobs potential lies. Unfortunately, foreign direct investment in Nepal is quite low. Even though Nepalese save quite a lot of money, they don't invest it. So what's wrong here? And I think there are a number of factors which immediately jump to the eye. One, of course, is that when there is political uncertainty and you still have constitutional issues to resolve, this makes people nervous. They want predictability, they want to know what tomorrow will look like. So hopefully, when the political issues are resolved, that will help. But in addition to that, I do think that we have to look at the institutional environment. Nepal needs the right laws, you need the right administration, you need all the ministries to work well, and I think you have to develop a clearer idea of where the potential in Nepal lies. So you need better infrastructure, you need to get that hydropower on tap. You need to look at particular sectors. Tourism is a fantastic sector, but also your rural economy. Most of your people work in the countryside. I'm sure there is a greater potential there than has been tapped as yet. So I think a strategy for Nepal, I know your 7th development plan is coming up, I hope jobs will be at the centre of it, and if they are, the ILO will be there to help out.
And looking at the statistics, there's a large chunk of youth unemployed in the country. What does the future hold for them? In countries like Nepal, where creating job internally, still you have to wait for the political things to settle down.
It's a great question. I had a meeting with a group of young people at lunchtime, 70 young people, telling me what their hope for the future was. They want to work in Nepal. I think they really want to have these opportunities in their own country and to contribute to the future of their own country. Some of them are very interested in being their own boss, entrepreneurship, creating their own enterprises. And I think this is a very important part of the story. I think we all know that the older we get, the less good we are at new technologies. Young people have a natural advantage in harnessing new technologies. These people are very IT savvy, and as the economy moves and understanding of information technologies becomes more and more important, I think developing the skills of young people is really important. But our educational systems need to produce the skills that the labour market wants. Too often we mismatch what the education system produces and what the labour market really needs.
You just touched on the technology. How do you see the modern technology affecting the labour market?
Great question, and we don't have easy answers. We are always told around the world that we're on the verge of the 4th industrial revolution. All these new technologies that we know about, robotics, artificial intelligence. And the big question is it going to create more jobs or destroy more jobs? And, depending on who you listen to, you get the answer in both directions. My view on this matter is that, don't just leave it to the technology. If you think our future is going to be decided purely by technology, we will just sit back and fold our arms and watch. We mustn't do that. This is a policy debate. So in my mind, the impact of technology in the future will depend on what we do. Our future is in our hands. By its very nature, technology is good for people. It alleviates us of the need to work in really tedious and tough conditions. It liberates us, but it needs to be managed, and that's the big challenge for the coming years.
So even that could be an opportunity in your
Definitely,
field.
absolutely, definitely.
So, coming back to the question that I put up a bit earlier, you must have come across, you must be tired of answering this question once you arrived in Nepal. Of course, what is ILO doing for to protect the rights of our migrant workers?
Well, I mean, just to say in general, we have working in Nepal, I've got nearly 50 people working in the country on different projects. We have a portfolio of about $17 million worth of projects. We're working on road reconstruction, we're working on youth projects, we're working on a whole variety of issues. But migration, I think, is a key question, and there are several things we have to do. I think we have to combine the efforts made in Nepal itself to prepare its migrants and ensure that they are safe, but we also need to reach the destination countries. It seems to me that putting in place bilateral arrangements to manage...
Can ILO play a role
Yes.
in putting up this bilateral labour agreements?
We certainly can. Very recently we've adopted guidelines on fair recruitment,
Yeah.
which means that if these guidelines are applied, the worker will be protected and looked after properly from the very moment of recruitment. We have to get these private agencies to behave properly, from the arrangements in the sending country to what happens when you get to the receiving country, including what happens if something goes wrong. What happens if a worker from Nepal arrives in whatever country it is, the contract is not respected, he's tricked, he's put in debt, then they need remedies. And we're trying to put in place the types of mechanisms which offer these basic protections. And I have to say, we're not alone in this. Before I came to Nepal, I attended the Global Forum on Migration and Development in Bangladesh. This is the international community coming together and understanding that we have to make migration fairer and safer. There's going to be more migration in the future, more and more and more, and it has to meet the minimum standards of acceptability.
Of course, South Asia, most of the countries in South Asia, a lot of people go outside this region for work there. Of course, if ILO can work on setting up this bilateral labour agreement, I hope it also depends on the interest of the countries concerned.
Absolutely.
And how much concern you find the government and the state at the moment approaching you on this issue?
Listen, I understand that the major destination countries for your citizens, Malaysia is one, but also the Gulf states, the Middle East Gulf countries. We're engaged in a very deep dialogue with the Gulf countries. In the last week, I have had conversations with the Labour Minister of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And you may have seen this week that Qatar has announced a major reform of its so-called kafala system of labour sponsorship. These are important points, but in our dialogue with Qatar, which is particularly present in the ILO, there is a complaint open against Qatar on this subject. We are working to have them improve their systems of migration, from recruitment to labour inspection and wages and safety and health, to the resolution of problems, dispute resolution, all the way through. Now, we have a long way to go, but the dialogue is open, and these countries are listening. I think they've understood that they cannot continue with the arrangements they have. They recognise that what they have is not acceptable and change has to come, and the ILO has a responsibility to help that happen. So I recognise the problem is very big, it's a long road forward, but we're walking along it.
So it has been half a century, ILO's engagement in Nepal. Any future plans, any additional things coming up for Nepal from ILO's side?
Yeah, absolutely. We're busy negotiating with our Nepalese friends, and I insist again, governments, workers and employers, a new, what we call decent work country program. We are negotiating on a set of priorities for Nepal, which Nepalese constituents will decide, and that will guide our activities here in the next 4 to 5 years. Very excited about it. I think that the conversations that I've had with employers, with workers, with the Minister of Labour and with the Prime Minister himself, I think indicates that there's a real meeting of minds here. And my belief is that ILO has been a good friend to Nepal, Nepal's been a good friend to the ILO. We're on a convergent path. And I think jobs at the centre, decent jobs at the centre of the next development plan is something that can bring us further together.
How is ILO's objectives and work direction connected to the Sustainable Development Goals?
Very strongly. As you know, the United Nations adopted these Sustainable Development Goals last year. This is the blueprint, the roadmap for development in the world until 2030. The good news for the ILO is decent work is right in the middle of this agenda. SDG number 8 is about inclusive growth, full employment and decent work for all. And this is great for us because it means it's not just the ILO pushing for decent work, it's the whole of the UN and international system. And so I think that we're right at the centre of that agenda, we're committed to its delivery, and we're better than in Nepal to deliver this agenda, where the needs are so obvious, and I think our partnership is so strong.
How robust an organization is ILO in the UN framework right now, and how is it going forward?
Look, we're the oldest organisation, that's the first one in the UN. We were founded before anybody else, so we think we're very important in that regard. But no, I think we're well placed. I really think we're well placed because as the SDGs demonstrate, I think many people in the world realise that the lack of decent jobs is perhaps the number one problem we face in the world. You know, every year we have to create 200 million jobs for young people. It's just incredible. We have to, 40 million jobs for young people, 40 million. We have to create those jobs. There is nothing more disturbing of a society, and sometimes nothing more dangerous, as we're seeing, than young unemployed people with no perspectives for the future. This is what destroys our societies. This is what creates disturbances. The ILO's founding motto is that lasting peace depends upon social justice. So we're promoting social justice, and getting young people into a job is what really matters. We all know it. We all know it from our families, from our own experience.
All these activities are directed towards achieving sustainable development and peace and sustainability from all quarters. Your Excellency, just before we depart, and just one question that a lot of Nepalese might be waiting to listen from you. Did ILO, did this issue ever come to ILO's attention? The 2020 World Cup issue in Qatar, a lot of Nepali migrant workers, and the issue of the treatment of Nepali migrant workers in Qatar for the 2020 World Cup infrastructures.
It has come to our attention, absolutely. Indeed, it was precisely what you're pointing to that was at the origin of a major complaint presented by the international trade unions to the ILO, which basically alleges that, and particularly in the context of the World Cup, this is what it's all about, that Qatar is failing to protect migrant workers, particularly on the building sites. And I know so many Nepalese workers are on those sites. There were lots of reports of people being killed on those sites, and this triggered what is, for me, one of the most major issues on my table when I get back to Geneva. We will have a major debate, and I'm interacting with the Qataris in March next year to see if we can agree a program of cooperation to help your people out, not in theory, not in a speech, but on the building sites. On the building sites.
Last question, Your Excellency. What message are you taking from Nepal to your headquarters in Geneva?
Look, I'm taking, firstly, it's great to be in Nepal. It's a wonderful country. You cannot help but feel good being in Nepal. But I take away something more than that emotional response. A government which is tuned in to our issues of decent work, employers and workers which, more than I have seen in the past, are talking to each other. And that's that social dialogue which is a dynamo for decent work. So I'm very encouraged. I think we have, admittedly, very big challenges, but many opportunities to go with them, and that's great.
Thank you, Excellency. We talked with International Labour Organization Director General Guy Ryder himself about the situation of the labour market, how technology is affecting the labour market, and especially the issues of Nepali migrant workers. And thank you so much for your time. Until next time, from all of us here, bye-bye and namaste.